Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Squawk podcast, where we break down everything Baltimore Ravens related, including news. And unfortunately, this week, we're going to be talking about some not so great news that happened in the last week of June. I am joined by my co-host, Chad. How are you doing, Chad?
Hey, how's everybody going? Yeah, it's doing good, man. All is well. Sad to have to talk about some somber news. Us being fans of a football team, Ravens organization, you always want to be talking about hopefully wins and losses. And
this is a different kind of loss, I think.
Yeah.
This is like the news that we got this past week. If you've been living under a rock or you just haven't been following along because you've been enjoying the wonderful weather that we've been having all over the country, June 22nd, our defensive lineman, Jaylon Ferguson, was at a house. The reports don't really indicate whether it was his home or not. I'm assuming it was not his home because if it was, I think the reports would have reported that. 11:30 at night on June 21st, police responded to a house. They found Jaylon Ferguson unresponsive, being treated by medical personnel, and he was announced dead at the scene. He was 26 years old. There wasn't an initial cause of death reported through the initial reports, but we found out yesterday that it was due to an overdose related passing cocaine that was mixed with fentanyl. So there's been a lot of talk on a lot of the chat rooms and stuff like that, where I just wanted to clear the air about some things when it comes to this fentanyl issue that we're dealing with in this country. A lot of the times, these fentanyl overdoses are you never know that it's in any of the drugs that you take. Should you take drugs in general? No, you shouldn't. It's a choice that negatively impacts a lot of things in your life. But at the same time, people do it. Even people making millions of dollars in the NFL do it, and some of the more economically impacted people in our country do it as well. We're at the point in this country now, Chad, where 150 people die a day of opioid, mostly fentanyl-related overdoses. I don't want to speculate on anything in particular. Like, I don't want to say, oh, his friends fucking more than likely whatever drug dealer they got these drugs from ended up cutting it, because we've read enough reports and I've seen enough news articles about this particular issue where that seems to be the case. And it's interesting because the article written by Jamison Hensley specifically says a spokesman for the Maryland Department of Health said Ferguson's death on June 21st was ruled an accident. Bullshit. I'm at the point where I think that we should be going after these drug dealers who are cutting this shit. They're doing it for profit, and they're doing it so that they can get their product out on the street and get people coming back for it. But it's essentially poison. And like I said before, I read an ABC News article that seems to indicate this is happening to 150 Americans every single day. It's incredibly sad. Just in general, with Jaylon's case, 26 years old, he has 3 kids. He seemed like a really awesome person off the field. I mean, he responded during the draft. He wasn't even part of the draft process because he was dealing with his hometown in Louisiana getting hit by a tornado. And he was there sort of administering aid, just like seeing where he could help, buying meals for people, helping clear out the wreckage from that. And it's just, this was supposed to be a breakout year for him. Like, he had lost all this weight. He was looking good in camp from the reports that I was hearing. He was showing up every single day to it. And he was putting in a lot of effort and a lot of good work, really. He's the FBS record he holds the FBS record for college sacks, 45 in the 3 years that he played at Louisiana Tech. And in his NFL seasons that he played for the Ravens, 67 tackles, 4.5 sacks. sort of like a really nice depth piece that we had on our team. And he seemed like an even better person. And I don't really know what we do about this fentanyl issue. It's easy to say don't do drugs, but people do it all the time. And I don't think people should lose their lives over something that I'm sure he had no idea was even in the drugs that he was taking. And there seems to be not a whole lot of empathy online. It's really like people are split right down the middle on this. It's like they, oh, he's got millions of dollars and why is he worried about any of this stuff? Another report came out, actually the same report that Jamison Hensley wrote. He mentioned he set up an online fundraiser for his kids because recently they survived a house fire. I don't know if you heard about this, but like he went back into the house to try and get his child's possessions like out of this house that I guess just completely burned down, to the point where his own toes were burned in the process. So crazy set of circumstances just in general, and a crazy amount of hardship that he's had to go through in his life in general. And he always seemed to respond in a way that was positive, and everybody loved him. You saw on Twitter, Twitter exploded. Ravens Twitter exploded between the players and just the organization in general about how much they love this guy. Super sad. I don't know what else to say about this, but something needs to be done about this fentanyl shit. I'm sure you and I both know people that we went to school with who have passed away because of this stuff. And it's just, people need to start getting charged with murder at this point. I don't know what else is going to impact this particular issue. So I've talked enough about it. I'm not going to talk anymore. I don't know. What did you think of when you heard the news? Are you do you have any feelings on this? Rest in peace to him. His family wants privacy, so I'm not going to speculate too much on anything, but just what were your feelings on everything?
Yeah, man. A loss of, we kind of talked about it when Dwayne Haskins suddenly passed. It's tragic. Another loss of life, especially a younger person and something we can relate to as, we're older. Sometimes I forget our age, but, us being early 30s, hearing that someone 4 years younger than us, 5 years younger than us passed away, you really just kind of sit back and imagine yourself 5 years ago and what you had going on in your life, and just imagine all that ending just suddenly like that, and how that would affect your family, how that would affect your friends. So when that kind of stuff happens, especially younger people, it just hits home. Hits really hard because you can just relate, because you've been in that age position. Obviously when we were 26, we weren't millionaires playing on a professional sports, a professional athlete or anything like that. And when I was 26, I didn't have 3 kids and a wife, so relying on me financially. So I know it's just it really makes you hurt for his family, especially his kids, his wife. It makes me sick, And I don't want to speculate too much on the circumstances of his death. Everybody makes mistakes. I know plenty of people in my lifetime that have, used drugs recreationally. It's not the smartest thing to do. But yeah, anybody can get a bad batch of something, and it can be your last decision in life and your worst decision in life, and you could just be, you could be gone any second. So prayers and thoughts to his family. I remember I also thought about when he was drafted, because like you said, his last year in college, he broke this single season sack record. And guess who held the record before? Terrell Suggs. The reports out of OTAs was that he lost a lot of weight, and he, was in good shape, and, and all that, you can just listen to his teammates via what they were saying on Twitter that I saw. Patrick Queen was talking about how they were always in the sauna together, and had a competition who can last in the sauna together. And
Your Maryland's showing.
Yeah, right. So it's he was loved by his teammates, and so I'm sure he was a great person. Rest in peace. Sad situation.
And so early in his career too. I mean, it's only his third season. It's hard to really gauge a person and how they're going to pan out in the NFL after 3 seasons, which is why I think a lot of his teammates were saying that this was going to be a big year for him.
Yep.
Because, you get settled in after 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL, you become really like a veteran at that point on a team, especially if you stay with that team for a long period of time. I've seen enough of people passing away just because they want to do a drug recreationally and ends up getting cut with what is essentially poison.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know how you address this issue, but I think a good way is going after these drug dealers and charging them with murder. I don't think it's one of the situations where your friend gets it and your friend knows that, oh, this shit is cut with something. I think it takes everybody by surprise. And I think shit goes south really quickly when it comes to this kind of a thing. So rest in peace to Sack Daddy. I'm really sorry for his family. I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular subject because they've requested privacy, and I'm sure, for the people who do listen and watch our podcast, like I want to be professional about it and just say, let's end it at that. But something needs to be done in this country about that because it's out of control right now. Let's move on to another death. The same day, well, not the same day technically, but within a few hours, it feels like within a few hours of learning about Jaylon Ferguson, we hear about a legend, dude, a NFL, not just an NFL legend, a really like a Ravens legend, Tony Siragusa, passing away in his home in New Jersey at the age of 55. He might be, oh man, it's hard to say. He might be like a top 5 most important player of all time in the Ravens franchise. And yet when you look at his personal accolades, you wouldn't know it. He never made a Pro Bowl. I am shocked by that. Never, not once did he ever go to the Pro Bowl, either with the Colts, where he started his career as an undrafted free agent. I believe in 1991 is when he was drafted. That was his first year, spent 5 years with the Colts, and then transferred over to Baltimore. None there and none with the Ravens, which is just baffling to me because of all the guys that I remember from those early 2000s years, like Tony Siragusa is like one of the more memorable guys. And if he never made a Pro Bowl, I feel like that's like the most underrated Raven of all time. We don't know what his cause of death was. And again, I don't know if we're going to necessarily find out anytime soon. We still don't know. We know he died in his sleep, and he was 55 years old. You want to talk about a guy who had like a nuclear factory personality? This dude was unreal, like playing pranks on his teammates, whether it's locking the tight ends in the tight end room that you saw in Hard Knocks or landing a helicopter the year after he won the Super Bowl on the practice field to show up for OTAs one year. Like he was just a personality. I loved him. I don't know whether you remember him as a sideline reporter for Fox after he retired. Hilarious. He would wear like these gigantic fur coats. He was on an episode of The Sopranos, which doesn't surprise me at all because that motherfucker looked exactly like Tony Soprano in a lot of ways. He looked like one of his dudes from New Jersey. I mean, he didn't even really have to act. He just had to be himself, really. I mean, that was probably the easiest paycheck he ever got. I just want to highlight the importance of what guys like him and guys like Ray and Rod Woodson, Peter Boulware, Sam Adams, these guys are integral figures to the identity of what the Ravens are even today. I mentioned in a previous podcast that when the Browns originally moved from Cleveland to Baltimore, it was not well received in the city of Baltimore. It's a lot of cloak and dagger stuff. The Browns moved to Baltimore in a way that was very reminiscent of the way the Colts left town in the mid 80s, which was middle of the night. No one had any idea that it was happening. Part of the reason was because the owner of the Cleveland Browns, Art Modell, was really vocal and against teams moving at that time, which is like hilarious now when you look at the profits that the NFL has garnered with moves and why these billionaires and multi-hundred millionaires move their teams. But he was really adamant about teams not moving. And then he ends up doing it. Not even a couple years later. I did some research on this. I guess there was kind of this spat between him and the mayor of Cleveland. He didn't get an upgrade to his stadium, basically the Browns stadium, and it was desperately needed. The mayor told him to go fuck himself. The Cleveland Indians at the time in baseball in the 90s were really good. They were getting good. And they got a brand new field in Jacobs Field, which pissed Art Modell off because the Indians were paying him rent on the stadium that they were using at the time. So there was a pissing match with that, and Art Modell ends up leaving and coming to Baltimore under less than scrupulous reasons, I guess. He just was like, fuck Cleveland, I'm moving my team. He gets to Baltimore in 1996. Like I said, wasn't really well received. And then slowly over time, they began to gain players who established the identity of the Baltimore Ravens, even as we know them today. When people talk about Baltimore, what they talk about is incredible defense. And it really stems from one team, which is just like mind-blowing to me. It really does. I guess you could make an argument that Pittsburgh and Chicago are the same way, but those organizations have been around way longer. And they've had, Pittsburgh has won like 6 Super Bowls, so they've kind of wrapped their identity around that. The Ravens' identity is defense, and it was guys like Tony Siragusa, guys like Ray Lewis, Rod Woodson in the early years where the team didn't really have an identity, and they were trying to build that to really build a fan base in Baltimore. And it ends up 4 years later, they end up winning a Super Bowl, and it's largely because of Tony Siragusa and Sam Adams allowing for Ray Lewis to go sideline to sideline and cover the amount of field that he did. He wouldn't have been able to do that if Tony Siragusa couldn't manage double teams. And I also found an interesting note. The first Ravens coach, Ted Marchibroda, he was his head coach at the Colts. And I found an article that basically said, because the Colts had made the AFC Championship game in 1995, they lose, and the Colts fire Ted. And Tony Siragusa has this quote where he's just like, I'm paraphrasing here, but he was really upset. He didn't like the new coach that the Colts got, Lindy Infante, what's his name? Don't know if you know that guy. I don't. But he was against that guy, and he ends up following his head coach to Baltimore. Ted doesn't have a great record. He goes 16-31-1 in 3 seasons, and then he's replaced by Brian Billick, which is interesting because there's a universe somewhere where Bill Belichick is the head coach of the Ravens. I guess he thought that when the Browns moved, right, he would just get the head coaching job, and instead they fucking fired him. And then he ends up going to New England. Yeah, never made a Pro Bowl, but he established the identity. When we talk about the Ravens today, what does everybody talk about? Oh, this is a team that is known for their defense and historically have had amazing defenses. We've also had historically crappy defenses some years too. But none of that shit matters, or it's viewed in a way where it's like, oh, they're not living up to the Ravens standard. Right. Which is amazing defense all the time. And Ed Reed comes along later and he helps with that legacy as well. But in those early years, it was guys like Goose and it was guys like Ray Lewis the personalities that mixed into that locker room were the perfect things that they needed at the time they were starting. It's kind of crazy to see him gone at 55. You know, we talk about 26 being young. There are a lot of people who are older that'll tell you 55 is like your prime. What do you think of Goose passing away? Obviously sad for his family and everything like that. What were your first thoughts when you heard the news?
Yeah, just, anytime there's a loss of life, horrible thoughts, feel bad for his family, but it made me think, it's funny because when you think of Tony Siragusa, for me personally, I don't think about the on the field player. I think about his personality as a whole, because you hear, you saw the stories from the Hard Knocks when we were Baltimore Ravens, were the spotlight on that season when he was playing for the Ravens. But we were really young, so I don't really remember much of him playing. But you remember the stories, and you remember him being analyst fox on the sideline. That's what I remember the most, and him being goofy and wearing the fur coats, and just he really understood the game, and then so it's just funny that someone, like you said, that was kind of flew under the radar on the football field, where he was doing the dirty work, taking on double teams and making room for Ray Lewis to run up the A gap, to sack quarterbacks and tackle running backs and all that kind of stuff. You just think his personality stands out the most, which is awesome, because someone like that makes more of an impact, in my opinion, when you're a professional athlete, you play really well, you're on a historic team that wins historic defense that wins a Super Bowl, and your personality shines more than those accolades, so that's kind of like what I reflected on when I heard the news, is that this guy was like, he touched a lot of people outside of just football, which is really cool. You see interviews with him and Howard Stern, like he was featured on a Sopranos episode. So it's just really cool that he's a personality like that was a part of Ravens history, and that makes you proud as a fan, at least in my eyes. I heard a story about how he would steal rookies' car keys. Like, he would get equipment assistants to like steal car keys, and he would, like, during training camp and stuff, he would haze the rookies, and he would get their car keys and then take their car and drive it to like a local grocery store, and leave the car there and get a ride back to the facility. And then he would just he was a prankster. He would watch the rookies like walk out to the parking lot looking for their car, and they're calling the cops, like, because they think they got robbed, someone stole their car. And I heard a couple stories about that. He did it, him and the famous restitution thing with him and Shannon Sharp on Hard Knocks, because he was really, he picked on Shannon Sharp. He stole his car as well. It's just funny stuff like that you hear. And even, I think we mentioned him in the last podcast, because we were talking about the 30 for 30 that's being filmed. And that's the first thing, like, I thought, I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear interviews with Tony Siragusa. That's literally the first. I'm sure I thought of, obviously Ray Lewis, obviously, but 1A, 1B was like, I can't wait for the interviews with Tony Siragusa, because the stories he's going to share and all that kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that they got some of that. I heard that they got some of that filmed before his passing, so he's going to be on there. So that's nice to know, because we'll get to see him interact with like Ray and all those guys, Tony Starks and Peter Bulwero and all them guys. So yeah, man, it's sad. He's another family man. He had kids, a wife. He was young, 55. I think it was Howard Stern interview where he was talking about how his father passed when he was young, and how he just wanted to live his life to the fullest without any care and worries and stuff. So seems like he did that. Unfortunately, his life ended early, and yeah, you just feel, thoughts and prayers to his family, of course. And
it's kind of crazy that like he could joke around with people like that, because imagine if he, like, it's crazy that people didn't think he was an asshole. You know what I mean? Like,
sure,
oh, this
dude,
guy like stole my car, like
I think there's a lot of stories where he comes off as an asshole in some,
like he rubbed people he could have rubbed people the wrong way, but everyone was just like, oh, that's just what Goose does. And that speaks a lot to your personality too. Like if you can do things that would otherwise rub people the wrong way, and people don't really have hard feelings about it because that's your personality.
They know who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That kind of speaks a lot to that means you're a good person. Like you have a good personality and people really like you in order for you to get away with some of that shit.
He's a real person, Yeah, there's another story about how he would mess with Matt Stover in like big game moments. Like if you effing miss this kick, I'm gonna beat your ass when you come back to the sideline. And he's like kicking game-winning field goals. This is like during playoff games, and he's screaming at Matt Stover on the sidelines, like, you better not miss this kick and all this kind of stuff. And it's just stuff like that I hear. I'm just like, this guy was wild, funny dude.
Blue collar, like seemed like he worked really hard at his craft too. Like when he hit the practice field, he was all business. When he hit during the field during games, all business.
Yeah.
Ribbon people. I view that as motivation.
Yeah,
More. There should be more pressure put on kickers like that. Now it's sort of like people are like, they miss a kick and they're like, oh fuck. They kind of just let it go. I kind of like someone who's like, if you don't make this kick, I'm going to shank you on the sideline. I don't know if he said that. But imagine somebody on your team telling you that.
He threatened his life. I know from what I heard is that he would threaten Matt Stover's life if he missed the kick. Like that's how far he would go. So he definitely pushed. It seemed like he went over the line a bunch of times in his pranks, but I guess people understood that that's just who he was. And I mean, that's a lot of balls though. I mean, if I couldn't, I would feel like I'm psyching out I wouldn't want to be the person to psych out a kicker in a playoff game when he's about to kick a potential game winner.
Yeah, I know.
Matt Stover said that he did it during practice too and training camp, and so I guess it was a way of Tony Siragusa. Like, I'm sure he thought it was doing good.
Him trying to make an impact on a position that he's not really playing, but a position that's really important, as we've seen with our kicking history on our team. Yeah, just and I want to bring up the Texans real quick. The Texans are a team that have no identity, really. They had JJ Watt, and I get it. He was an amazing player for them, but he's one guy. I feel like the Ravens had a collection of dudes who just sort of set the tone early. Their early years, they were not great. Like I said, 16-31-1 before Brian Billick came along. I mean, it's not fantastic.
But they were building that foundation of players. Yeah,
and personalities too. And you can pull people into an expansion team. And if you have a dynamic locker room where guys would go to bat for each other, fuck with each other, that is invaluable in a lot of ways. That it's a positive that translates off the field just as much as it does on the field with performance. And I really believe setting that environment and setting that sort of tone early on has propelled the Ravens franchise in a direction where the way that people talk about our organization is very defensive minded, and it comes back to that team. The Texans don't have that. The Texans are the Jaguars you can look at. They never really had. They had some good teams in the 90s with Mark Brunell and the wide receivers they had. I can't remember.
The wide receiver duo they had.
Kenny McCardle, the wide receiver there. But that was so short-lived. This was sort of like a flash in the pan, and none of those teams won a Super Bowl. So super important. I'm really sad that Tony Siragusa has passed away. I think 55 is young, personally. And he was extremely important. And he was also great off the field. I mean, he was a Fox analyst for 12 years, sideline reporter. He was a guy who would stand in the end zone. He would stand in the end zone and he would give his reports from the end zone, which I think I don't know if anybody did that at that time. I think that was just like his spot. It's where
I think he pioneered that for sure.
Yeah, and it's
having somebody with that kind of personality that knew the game like he knew it because he was a player. Yeah, I'm sure he brought a lot of insight as a on the field reporter during those games. I remember seeing him a lot, but I couldn't tell you like, oh yeah, I remember this one time where he was like, kind of like how Tony Romo now, you can be like, damn, Tony Romo knows the game. Like he's calling plays before they happen type of stuff. I'm sure he had those type of moments maybe, but obviously we were too young to kind of remember those type of things.
I was too distracted by what he was wearing. He would wear fucking fur coat, like gangster fur coats. If it was later in the season, he'd wear these big fucking fur coats. And I remember looking at those and being like, damn, Tony's set. He looks warm as fuck in that thing. I wish I had one of those.
I'm sure he was toting his Super Bowl ring too on the side.
Oh yeah, I would do that everywhere. Absolutely.
I'm sure he was fucking with the fans. I heard a couple stories where he fucks with the fans and stuff. Like he was just he's a wild person.
Yeah,
I'm excited. Sure. I'm excited to when the 30 for 30 is released. I'm excited to see what they got with him.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see the interviews with him because I'm sure they're going to be electric. You know what I mean? All the things that he can talk about on and off the field.